So this happened when I was about 13. My mom and I were at Target just doing some regular shopping, nothing special. We weren't in a rush or anything, so I was wandering off into different aisles like I usually did. It was a normal thing. I'd just explore for a bit, look at stuff, and then meet back up with my mom later. No big deal. I was in one of the aisles, just minding my own business, when this woman I had never seen before suddenly walked right up to me and wrapped me in a hug. Not a casual, polite hug, a deep, emotional, almost desperate hug. At first, I wasn't really alarmed. I'm Hispanic, and my extended family is huge, so it's not uncommon for older relatives to greet me with a hug, even if I don't recognize them right away. I figured she was someone from my family, maybe a distant aunt or a friend of my mom's who hadn't seen me since I was little. But something felt off. She was holding on to me way too long, and I could hear her sniffle like she was crying. That's when she started calling me a name that wasn't mine. I don't remember exactly what it was. Let's just say it was Eliza. Eliza, it's you, baby. I've missed you so much, she whispered. That was the first moment I felt a little jolt of unease. I gently pulled away and told her, as politely as I could, that she had the wrong person. I wasn't Eliza. I had never seen her before. I thought it would just be a funny little misunderstanding, something we'd laugh about before she apologized and went on her way. But then, things took a really dark turn. She just stared at me, her expression shifting into something unsettling. It was like she didn't even hear me. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out to touch my face like she was trying to convince herself that I was real. Then, in the most heartbroken voice I had ever heard, she whispered, "But baby, you died." My stomach dropped. She wasn't just mistaking me for someone else. She truly, completely, wholeheartedly believed that I was her dead daughter. She kept talking, her words tumbling out like she was in shock. "Why did you die, my love? Where have you been? I buried you. I saw you in that car. But you're here now. Thank God you're here now." I had no idea what to do. Every logical part of me knew this was just some horrible case of mistaken identity. But the way she was looking at me, it made me doubt myself. For a split second, I actually had this weird thought. What if she's right? What if I'm Eliza? What if I just forgot everything? I told her again that I wasn't Eliza, but she wouldn't accept it. She smiled through her tears, shaking her head like I was just being silly. "Of course it's you. A mother knows her own daughter's face." Now you might be thinking, okay, maybe she was mentally unstable. Maybe she was homeless or under the influence of something. But she wasn't. She was completely put together, well-dressed, clean, wearing makeup, carrying a normal shopping basket full of everyday things. She didn't have that disoriented, lost look some people have when they're struggling with mental illness. Everything about her seemed normal, except for the fact that she was completely convinced I was her dead child. The longer she spoke, the more it felt like she was reliving some past trauma in real time. Like she had truly believed her daughter was gone, and now suddenly, against all odds, she was standing in front of her again. The more she talked, the more panicked I got. I felt trapped, like I was losing control of reality. The weight of her words, the intensity of her emotions, I couldn't take it. I muttered some excuse and practically sprinted out of that aisle, weaving through the store until I found my mom. I expected her to brush it off, maybe even laugh a little when I told her. But the second I explained what had just happened, the look on her face terrified me more than the woman did. My mom is not the overly protective, clingy type. She's always given me a lot of independence. But for the rest of our time in that Target, she wouldn't let me out of her sight. She held onto my arm while we walked, kept looking over her shoulder, and even made me stand right next to her while she checked out. She was shaken, and that scared the hell out of me. That moment stuck with me for a long time. For weeks after, I kept waiting for someone else to approach me. A father, a brother, a grandmother, someone else who was part of Eliza's family, someone else who would look at me with that same gut-wrenching recognition. Thankfully, it never happened. But to this day, I still think about that woman. It was my second year of college when this happened, and even though it's been a while, I still think about it every time someone asks me for a ride. I was 20 years old, living in a college town where crime was mostly just petty theft and the occasional sketchy encounter. The apartment complex my friends lived in had a reputation for parties, break-ins, and people getting their stuff stolen if they weren't careful. It was February, freezing cold, and I was bored out of my mind at home. Instead of sitting around doing nothing, I figured I'd head over to my friend's place and be bored with them instead. It was late, but that didn't really matter. We were the type to stay up until at least 3 a.m. I got in my car and made the short drive to their apartment. As I pulled into the lot and parked, I noticed a guy walking toward me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with purpose. He was also a complete stranger. Immediately, I looked away and picked up my pace, heading toward my friend's door. My instincts told me to just get inside and lock the door behind me. Before I could make it, I heard him call out, "Hey man, can I ask you something?" I hesitated. He kept talking. "I was wondering if I could get a ride back to my house. I don't have a car and no one's picking me up. I've been asking around, but nobody wants to give me a ride. I live pretty far, and it's cold as hell out here." Now, growing up in a city where you had to be street smart, I knew better than to trust random strangers, especially at night. I knew that giving a random person a ride was a bad idea, but for some reason, I let my guard down. Maybe it was the way he said it, like he was genuinely desperate. Maybe it was the fact that it was freezing outside, and I'd feel like an asshole just leaving him there. To calm my nerves, I cracked a joke. "Man, you know white people don't give rides to us." He laughed, and for a second, I felt okay about it. I told him to hop in. As we started driving, he kept thanking me over and over again. "Man, I appreciate this. Seriously, nobody else would help me out." I waved it off, telling him it wasn't a big deal. Everything felt fine at first. That was until I realized he was directing me to a part of town I actively avoided. I didn't know much about that area, only that it had a reputation for being rough. As I turned onto one of the streets, the potholes got bigger, the streetlights fewer, and my nerves shot up. Then he asked, "Hey, can I use your phone real quick?" He said he needed to call his friend to make sure someone was home to open the door. I hesitated but handed it over. He called once. No answer. Then he turned to me and said, "Hey, you should slow down. There might be police around here." I nodded but kept driving at a normal speed. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he just didn't want me speeding in a bad area. Then he tried calling again. Still no answer. And then he said it again. "Hey man, for real, slow down. Cops are around here." That's when it hit me. Why was he so worried about cops? Why was he telling me to slow down? Was he carrying something he didn't want to get caught with? Was he a wanted guy trying to avoid attention? At that moment, every worst-case scenario started running through my head. I suddenly felt like I had made a huge mistake. I was driving a complete stranger to a place I didn't know, at night, in an area with no cops nearby to help me. And now he was using my phone, which made me wonder if he was secretly signaling someone that he was almost home. There were too many stories of people being set up this exact same way. Someone asks for a ride, they direct you to a sketchy area, and when you get there, bam, they have people waiting to ambush you. My grip tightened on the wheel. For a split second, I considered speeding up on purpose to get pulled over. I figured if I got stopped by a cop, at least I wouldn't be alone with him anymore. But if he had something illegal on him, I didn't want to get involved with that either. Instead, I kept my cool and drove exactly how I normally would. Finally, We pulled up in front of his house. My heart was pounding. My eyes scanned the area, looking for movement, anyone waiting outside, anything suspicious. I didn't see anyone. He turned to me, thanked me for the 100th time, and got out. I gave him a quick wave, barely waiting for him to shut the door before I took off. I didn't breathe properly until I was at least 5 blocks away. The entire ride home, my hands were tight around the wheel, and my mind was racing. Who was that guy? Why was he so concerned about police? Was I overreacting, or had I just narrowly avoided something really bad? I'll never know. But one thing I do know, I'll never give a random person a ride at night again. This all happened back in February, when I was doing what I always did 3 days a week, waiting at the train station around 2:30 in the afternoon, about to head home from university. I commute 45 minutes each way between the city and my suburban town, and while the routine could get tiring, it had never been particularly eventful. That day was cold, and after climbing 50-something steps to get to the platform, I leaned against a freestanding advertisement to catch my breath. There weren't many people around, just one bigger guy, maybe a few years older than me, standing nearby in a long black peacoat and dark pants. He was just another commuter, until he suddenly slammed his arm into the billboard beside me. I instinctively turned to look, startled, and immediately he muttered a quiet, "Sorry," in a light, almost unsettling voice, a voice that didn't match his size at all. The whole thing seemed off, almost like he had done it on purpose to get my attention. It didn't make sense. It looked awkward, unnecessary, and way too exaggerated to be an accident. Before I could fully process it, he started making conversation. Now, I try to be open-minded with strangers. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt before making assumptions about them. But something about this guy just didn't sit right with me. Still, the train arrived within minutes, and like everyone else, we piled onto the crowded car. There weren't any seats available for both of us, so I sat next to someone else, while he sat directly behind me. I didn't think much of it, until I noticed him peering over the seat, watching my phone screen. At first, I ignored it and just focused on my game. But when we got to the last stop and the train emptied out, he stayed where he was. As I got up to leave, he finally spoke. "Candy Crush?" I turned and gave him a polite smile, telling him how addicted I was to it before making my way toward the exit. The conversation seemed normal enough, until he casually dropped something that made my stomach twist. "So, I see you go to school on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I always see you at the station in the morning and afternoon." I stopped mid-step. I hadn't told him that. I hadn't even mentioned that I was a student. Sure, I had a backpack and casual clothes, but that could have meant anything. He wasn't just guessing. He had been watching me. Still, I brushed it off and kept things lighthearted. "Yeah, I do." I figured maybe he just happened to notice me around, and it wasn't that weird. Right? Then we reached the parking lot. I expected to part ways, so I smiled and said, "Well, this is me. Nice meeting you." Then he smiled and replied, "Wait, I parked there too." And sure enough, his car was right next to mine. The lot was huge. What were the odds? His car was an old red Monte Carlo, and as I fumbled for my keys, he bragged about it, going on and on about how great it was. I pretended to be interested, said goodbye, and quickly got into my car. That Friday, I saw him again on the train ride home. This time, I didn't avoid sitting next to him, figuring maybe I'd be able to decide if I was just being paranoid. Nope. The entire conversation was forced. He talked way too much about himself, trying hard to impress me. How he played blues guitar at parties, which didn't sound like much of a party, to be honest. How he worked at McDonald's, which he also weirdly bragged about. It was painfully awkward, and the eye contact was unnerving. He'd just stare at me even when I'd look away. By the time we got off the train, I was ready to bolt, but once again, as I reached my car, I saw his car was parked next to mine. It was too much of a coincidence now. As we stood by our cars, he finally asked the inevitable question, "Can I get your number?" I didn't want to flat out reject him, so I offered Facebook instead. My plan was that he'd add me, see that I was in a 5-year relationship, and back off. He seemed a little disappointed, but agreed. That weekend, I thought a lot about how much I didn't like being around this guy. After talking to my friends, I decided I'd avoid him from now on. Monday came, and I made a point to arrive at the station early so I could stand farther down the platform and avoid running into him. No sign of him. But just as I let my guard down, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was. I gave him a quick nod and immediately boarded the train, making sure to sit somewhere he couldn't follow. Thankfully, we got split by the conductor. But then, my phone buzzed. A message. From him. "Sorry, got caught up with the conductor," I responded vaguely. "No problem. I just wanted to listen to music by myself today anyway." That should have been a clear enough hint. It wasn't. By now, I was genuinely freaked out. When we arrived at our stop, I called my boyfriend just to look busy and to have someone on the line in case anything happened. As I made my way through the parking lot, I took weird, inconvenient paths, weaving between rows of cars, trying to shake him off. But he followed me. No matter which way I turned, he stayed on my tail. At one point, I deliberately dropped the word babe into my phone conversation, hoping he'd hear and back off. He didn't. I sped walked to my car and, thankfully, this time he wasn't parked next to me. I jumped in, locked the doors, and got the hell out of there. I avoided him for another 2 weeks. Finally, when he saw me at the station again, he approached, waved at me, and asked, "Where have you been? It's been 2 weeks." Like he was keeping track. I took a deep breath and told him straight up, "I realized I prefer to be by myself at the station just listening to music. I'm sorry." His entire face changed. His expression turned cold, and he scowled like I had just personally insulted him. "Okay," he snapped, then turned and walked off. I felt relieved. I thought it was over. But then, on my drive home that day, something made my heart stop. I saw an old red Monte Carlo, his car, speeding down the opposite road. His town was in the other direction. He had no reason to be there. Was he following me? Had he been trying to figure out where I lived? I never saw him up close again, but every now and then, I'd catch him lingering near the top of the train station stairs, his eyes following me as I passed. He hasn't spoken to me since. I've never been a huge fan of Valentine's Day. It always felt like one of those holidays where people either rubbed their happiness in your face or drowned themselves in self-pity. But last year, I had a reason to dread it for a completely different reason. I had been single for a while, and my best friend Lisa convinced me to download a dating app. "Just to see what's out there," she said. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a couple of awkward conversations at best, but then I matched with a guy named Adam. He was normal, almost too normal. Cute, well-spoken, worked as a freelance photographer. We texted for about a week before he asked me out for Valentine's Day. At first, I hesitated. It felt a little cliché to go on a first date on the most romantic day of the year, but he had this easygoing charm about him, so I said yes. We agreed to meet at a small, cozy Italian restaurant downtown. Public place, early evening, safe enough. When I got there, I immediately spotted him waiting by the entrance, holding a bouquet of red roses. It was a nice gesture, but something about it made me uneasy. It felt off, like something you'd do for a girlfriend, not someone you were meeting for the first time. I shook it off, smiled, and thanked him for the flowers. Dinner started fine, but as the night went on, I noticed little things that made my stomach twist. He barely touched his food, but he stared at me, constantly. He asked me strange, overly personal questions, like whether I lived alone, or if my apartment had security cameras. When I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, he'd somehow circle back to something unsettling. At one point, I made a joke about being bad at cooking, and he said, "That's okay. You won't need to cook much when you're living with me." He laughed, but his eyes were serious. I forced a chuckle, hoping I was imagining things. The real alarm bells went off when I excused myself to go to the restroom. As I got up, he grabbed my wrist, tight. "Don't be too long," he said, his nails digging into my skin. I nodded, suddenly desperate to get away, even if just for a minute. I went to the bathroom and texted Lisa, telling her I had a bad feeling. She immediately called me. I picked up, whispering that I needed an excuse to leave. That's when I heard it, the sound of the door creaking open. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see Adam peeking inside. "I was worried," he said, smiling like he hadn't just invaded my privacy. "You were taking a while." I forced a smile, my heart hammering in my chest. "Just freshening up. I'll be right out." He hesitated for a second before nodding and leaving. My hands were shaking as I texted Lisa again. She told me to get out, now. I took a deep breath, left the bathroom, and walked straight to the waiter. I told him I felt unsafe, and he was kind enough to pretend I had a phone call and needed to step outside. I grabbed my coat and bolted. The whole way home, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Adam following me. My phone buzzed. Texts from him. "Where did you go? Are you okay? I don't like games. Call me." I blocked his number the moment I stepped inside my apartment, locking every possible entry point. But the real nightmare wasn't over yet. I woke up to a notification from my apartment's security app. There was motion detected outside my door at 3:12 a.m. My blood ran cold as I clicked on the video. It was Adam, standing there, holding another bouquet of red roses. He knocked once, then just stood still, staring at my door for what felt like forever. Then slowly, he bent down and slid something under the door, a single envelope. I waited until I was sure he was gone before I approached it. My hands trembled as I picked it up and pulled out the note inside. "You ruined our first date. Don't do it again." I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I went straight to the police with all the evidence I had. The texts, the security footage, the note. They took it seriously, issued a temporary restraining order, and advised me to stay somewhere safe. I crashed at Lisa's for a week, and when I finally went home, I had my locks changed and installed extra cameras. Adam never showed up again. His dating profile disappeared, and I never heard from him again. But to this day, I don't go on first dates without telling someone exactly where I am. I used to work the late shift at a small flower shop in my town. It was a quiet job most of the time, except around holidays, especially Valentine's Day. That's when we were slammed with orders. Men rushing in last minute, couples picking out arrangements together, and the occasional sad-eyed person buying flowers for an ex they swore they were totally over. Last year, my boss asked me to stay late on Valentine's night to finish up some deliveries. Normally we closed at 8, but since so many people were scrambling for last-minute orders, we extended our hours. I didn't mind too much. The extra cash was nice, and I didn't have any special plans anyway. Most of the deliveries were straightforward, handing off bouquets to giddy women at apartment doors, dropping arrangements at fancy restaurants where guys had them scheduled to be waiting at their tables. It wasn't until my second-to-last delivery that the night took a turn. The order was for a woman named Melissa, and the note attached just read, "For my one and only." No name, no signature, just those 5 words. The address was in a residential neighborhood about 15 minutes away, and I figured it was some guy sending his girlfriend or wife flowers to surprise her. Nothing unusual. When I pulled up, the house was dark, except for a small porch light. I double-checked the address on my phone before getting out, bouquet in hand. As I walked up to the door, I noticed something odd. There were no decorations, no signs of Valentine's Day inside. Usually, on a night like this, you'd at least see candles in the window or a car in the driveway. I knocked twice. No answer. I waited a few seconds, then knocked again. Finally, I heard movement inside. The door opened just a crack, and a woman peeked out. She looked exhausted, like she'd been crying. Her eyes flicked to the flowers in my hand, and instead of looking happy, she tensed up. "Melissa?" I asked, holding up the bouquet. She hesitated before nodding. "Who sent these?" I glanced at the note. It doesn't say, just says, "For my one and only." Her face went pale. She looked behind her, then back at me. "I didn't order these." "That's okay," I said quickly, assuming it was just an unexpected gift from her boyfriend or husband. "Maybe they're from your partner?" She shook her head fast. "No, I don't have one." At this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. I'd done hundreds of flower deliveries before, and usually, people were happy, or at least indifferent. But Melissa looked scared. "I don't want them," she whispered. Her eyes darted around like she was waiting for something, or someone. "Please take them back." I wasn't sure what to do. It wasn't like I could just return them to the shop. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Maybe a friend?" "No." Her voice was firm this time. "Take them away, please." I wasn't about to argue. I nodded, muttered something about policy, and backed away. As I walked back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder. Melissa was still standing in the doorway, staring out into the night like she expected someone to be watching her. I drove off, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. When I got back to the shop, I told my boss what happened. She frowned and checked the order history. "That's weird," she murmured. "The order came through our online system, but it doesn't have a customer name attached." That wasn't normal. Every online order had to have a name and billing info. "Can you check the payment details?" I asked. She clicked around on the screen, then froze. It was paid in cash. Someone came in earlier today and placed it in person. I waited, but she didn't say anything else. "Who placed it?" She hesitated before pulling up the security footage. We both leaned in as she fast-forwarded through the day's recordings. Around noon, a man walked in wearing a dark hoodie, head down. He approached the counter, slid some cash across, and wrote the note himself. His face was mostly hidden by the hoodie, but something about his posture, the way he stood, made my skin crawl. "Did he say anything when he ordered?" I asked. My boss shook her head. "I wasn't here, but Lily took the order. She said he didn't talk much, just handed her the note and left as soon as he paid." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "Do you still have the original paper he wrote on?" She nodded and dug through the drawer where we kept written orders before logging them digitally. When she pulled it out, my breath hitched. The handwriting was messy, hurried. But the thing that got me was the indentation, like he'd pressed down hard. I ran my fingers over the paper. Something felt off about it, so I tilted it slightly toward the light. And that's when I saw it. Underneath the words, "For my one and only," barely visible, was another set of letters. Faint, as if someone had written something else before erasing it. It said, "I found you." I don't know why, but my blood ran cold. I had the sickening realization that Melissa hadn't been excited or surprised by the flowers because she knew exactly who sent them, and she wanted no part of it. I don't know what happened after that. I never saw Melissa again. My boss called her the next morning to check in, but there was no answer. A few days later, I read a short article buried in the local news about a woman in that same neighborhood filing a police report for a stalker who had been watching her for months. No arrests were made. I quit the flower shop a few weeks later. Now, whenever I see bouquets of red roses on Valentine's Day, I wonder how many of them are sent by people who genuinely love someone. And how many are sent by someone who refuses to let go? Valentine's Day has never really been my thing. My friend Megan convinced me to at least go out for dinner. She said it was depressing to sit at home alone while couples flooded social media with pictures of fancy dates. She picked a small restaurant a few blocks from my apartment. It was one of those places that felt cozy rather than pretentious. Dim lighting, soft music, the smell of garlic and warm bread filling the air. We got a small booth near the window, ordered wine, and spent the first half of the night people watching. There was the couple that clearly just started dating, the guy nervously checking his watch. The older married pair that barely spoke, just ate in silence. And then, of course, the awkward first date couple, the woman smiling politely while the guy rambled on about himself. Everything was normal until I noticed a man sitting alone at the bar. He wasn't eating, just sipping a drink and staring in our direction. He looked about mid-40s, neatly dressed, but something about him felt off. He wasn't watching the game on the TV above the bar. He wasn't checking his phone. His eyes were fixed on our table. I nudged Megan. "That guy at the bar is creeping me out." She glanced over quickly and made a face. "Maybe he's waiting for a date? Then why is he staring? Maybe he thinks he knows you." I shook my head. I'd remember him. We tried to ignore it, focusing on our meal, but every time I glanced up, he was still looking. Not eating, not talking to the bartender, just watching. My stomach started to knot. Then, as we finished our meal, he stood up. I braced myself, expecting him to walk past us. Instead, he stopped at our table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, almost friendly. "I just wanted to say you look familiar." I forced a tight smile. "I don't think we've met." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe I'm mistaken." He turned slightly, then added, "Happy Valentine's Day." Then he left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "What the hell was that?" Megan shuddered. "That was weird." We brushed it off as some random guy being socially awkward, paid our bill, and left. The night was cold, and we decided to walk home together since Megan's place was just a block from mine. We talked about work, TV shows, anything to shake off the weirdness from the restaurant. But as we neared my building, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The man from the restaurant was across the street, walking at our pace. I didn't say anything at first, not wanting to freak Megan out. But when we stopped at the crosswalk, he did too. When we started walking again, so did he. Megan must have seen my face go pale because she asked, "What's wrong?" I whispered, "Don't look, but he's following us." She immediately grabbed my arm. "What do we do?" We were still a few minutes from my apartment, and I didn't want to lead him there. I quickly made a decision. "Let's go to that convenience store on the corner. Act normal." We cut across the street and into the brightly lit store, pretending to browse. Through the glass door, I saw him hesitate outside, hands in his coat pockets. He lingered for a few seconds, then turned and kept walking. We waited 10 minutes before leaving, taking a different route to my building. I barely slept that night. Every noise made me jump, and I checked the locks 3 times before finally forcing myself to lie down. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he just lived in the neighborhood. That's what I told myself until the next morning. I woke up to a text from an unknown number. "I knew I recognized you. See you soon." I felt sick. My number wasn't public, and I hadn't given it to anyone new. Megan swore she hadn't mentioned my name out loud at the restaurant. The only explanation was that he had followed me long enough to figure out who I was. I called the police. They took it seriously, but there wasn't much they could do with just a text message. I changed my number, took different routes to work, and didn't go anywhere alone for weeks. Eventually, the fear faded. The messages never came again. But every time I go out to eat now, I scan the room, looking for anyone watching too closely. I don't walk home alone anymore, and I never assume a strange man staring at me is harmless, because sometimes they aren't. I go to my grandparents' house in Bretagne every summer with my family. They're lucky enough to live on a cliff right next to the beach, which is honestly the best part of the trip. It's a beautiful place, but a little isolated. And to get to the beach, you have to take one of two staircases built into the rocks. One of them is close to my grandparents' house. The other is way at the opposite end of the beach. The place is big, but there aren't many ways in or out, which wasn't something I ever really thought about until last year. I've been going there since I was a kid, but now that I'm 18, I don't really do the same things I used to. I don't build sandcastles with my younger siblings or go swimming with my parents anymore. Instead, I started climbing the cliffs. Not the steep, deadly ones, but the semi-collapsing rocky areas that were kind of like natural hiking trails if you knew what you were doing. I'd do it for fun, but never really thought much of it. That detail became important later. One night last summer, after dinner, I decided to take a walk on the beach alone. No one else wanted to come, but I had done it plenty of times before and didn't think twice about it. I walked down the stairs and found a quiet spot on the beach to sit, smoke a joint, and listen to some music. I was relaxed, just staring out at the ocean, when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A man was walking along the beach. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It was a public beach after all. But after a few seconds, I realized he wasn't just walking. He was walking toward me. I turned my music down slightly, still pretending not to notice him. But the second he got close, he started talking. "Hey, you look familiar. Have we met before?" His voice was casual, like he was just making conversation, but I felt uneasy. He had a shaved head, square glasses, and tanned skin, the kind of tan you get from working outside all day. He looked like he was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. I shook my head. No. He didn't take the hint. "I think I saw you here earlier today." I shrugged, hoping that would end the conversation, but he sat down on a rock next to me. I kept my body turned slightly away from him, hoping he'd realize I wasn't interested in talking, but he just kept going. He told me he loved the beach, how nice the weather was, how he liked that I was a nice girl. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made my stomach drop. "It's rare to find nice girls. I'm glad you're not a bitch." The way he said it sent a cold chill down my spine. It was the kind of sentence that let me know exactly what kind of guy he was. Then, he started asking me personal questions. "What's your name? Where do you live?" I ignored him. That was when he leaned in closer. His expression never changed. He kept that same weird, forced grin on his face, but his body language was different. He wasn't just sitting near me anymore. He was looming. That was when I realized something that made my stomach turn. The only way off this beach was the staircase, and this guy was sitting right between me and it. There was no one else around. We were completely alone. I felt my heart start to race, but I kept my face neutral. I didn't want to let him see how scared I was. He clenched his fist slightly, but still smiled, like he was getting frustrated but trying to hide it. "So, are you really a nice girl? Why won't you talk to me?" I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew I couldn't stay there, but I also couldn't let him know I was panicking. Then I saw it. To my left, just a few feet away, was one of the smaller cliffs I had been climbing all summer. It wasn't too steep, and I knew I could get to the top in seconds. If I made it, I could run along the narrow path and straight home. I took a deep breath and stood up. "I don't want to talk anymore. Have a good night." His expression shifted. For the first time, he looked startled. Then, for a brief second, he turned his head and glanced toward the staircase. That was the moment I knew he had planned to block me from leaving. I didn't hesitate. I walked quickly toward the cliff, keeping my movements smooth, trying not to let him see how badly I wanted to run. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him stand up. The second I was close enough, I bolted. I scrambled up the rocks faster than I ever had before, scratching my hands and legs, but I didn't care. My only thought was, go, go, go. When I reached the top, I turned around and looked down. He was staring up at me. His grin was gone. His face was twisted in frustration, and he looked like he was about to do something terrible. I took off running. I sprinted the entire way back to my grandparents' house, not stopping until I was inside with the door locked behind me. I told my mom what had happened, and the next day, we went to the local police station to report it. I gave them the best description I could, and since it was a small village, they could have found him if he was a resident. But nothing ever came of it. French police don't exactly have the best reputation for follow-ups. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been able to climb that cliff, if I had hesitated even a second longer, if I had let him trap me on that beach. I haven't gone back alone since. I was almost 4 years old when I nearly disappeared forever. At the time, I was too young to realize just how close I came to being another missing child on the evening news. But now, whenever I let my mind drift back to that hot summer day in Maine, I feel a cold dread settle in my stomach. My mother and I had gone to the beach with a group of other stay-at-home moms and their kids. It was one of those perfect summer afternoons. The sky was clear, the waves were gentle, and the sand burned the soles of my feet as I ran between the ocean and our towel. I don't remember much about the other kids I played with that day, only that we were all around the same age, splashing in the shallows, digging holes in the sand, and chasing each other in the foamy surf. I was a curious, adventurous child, always eager to explore. I wasn't the type to stay glued to my mother's side, and since we were surrounded by a sea of moms and kids, I felt safe enough to wander. Maybe I chased a seashell. Maybe I got bored of playing tag. I don't remember exactly what made me stray from the group, but at some point, I did. That's when she appeared. I can still picture her as clearly as if it happened yesterday. A woman in a black one-piece bathing suit, with cargo shorts, sunglasses, and her hair pulled into a bun. She looked like any other mom at the beach that day. She had that friendly, comforting energy that put me at ease immediately, like the kind of woman who hands out snacks at a play date or ties your shoes if your parents aren't around. She smiled at me as if we already knew each other. "Hey there, sweetheart. You look like you're having a lot of fun," she said, crouching slightly so we were at eye level. I nodded, feeling an excited little flutter in my chest. At that age, I loved talking to adults. Something about being noticed, being spoken to like a big kid, made me feel important. "What games do you like to play?" she asked. I told her about tag, hide and seek, and my very favorite, playing pretend. She asked me all sorts of questions in return, smiling and nodding as if she were genuinely interested in everything I said. Then, she tilted her head and grinned. "What's your favorite candy?" "Tootsie Pops," I remember answering proudly. Her eyes lit up. "Really? That's my favorite too. You know what? I have a whole bunch in my car. Would you like one?" The offer sent a thrill of excitement through me. Tootsie Pops were a rare treat, something I only got on special occasions. And here was this nice lady, offering me one just because. I didn't hesitate. She held out her hand, and I took it without a second thought. Hand in hand, we walked through the crowd together. Looking back, that's the part that disturbs me the most. How easily I went with her, how natural it felt at the time, how nobody questioned why a little girl was leaving the beach with a stranger. I skipped beside her, completely oblivious to what was happening. I didn't feel scared. I wasn't hesitating or second-guessing. I wasn't even looking back to see if my mom was watching. If she hadn't seen me when she did, I wouldn't have stopped walking. I wouldn't have come back. I don't know how far we had gotten, maybe 20, 30 feet from where I had been playing, when I heard a sound that shattered everything. My mother. She was screaming my name at the top of her lungs. I turned my head and saw her jumping up and down, waving her arms frantically. She wasn't just calling for me, she was panicking. Before I could even react, I felt the woman's hand rip away from mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to convince me to keep going. She just turned and ran. I stood there, confused, watching as she darted through the crowd. She didn't look back once. I didn't understand what was happening. 1 minute, I had been walking with someone nice, and the next, my mother was running toward me, her face twisted in fear. She reached me in seconds, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms so tightly around me, I thought she was going to squeeze the air out of my lungs. I had never seen her cry before, but when she pulled back to look at me, there were tears in her eyes. "What were you doing? Where were you going?" she asked, her voice shaking. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't understand why she was so scared. "The lady was going to give me candy," I said simply. She hugged me again, even tighter this time. It wasn't until years later that I truly understood what almost happened. My mother told me that she had been chatting with one of the other moms when she happened to glance toward the water and saw me walking away with a stranger. She didn't recognize the woman. She didn't know where I was going. But the second she saw our hands clasped together, she knew. She said she had never screamed like that in her life. The part that makes me sick to my stomach now is how quickly that woman ran. She didn't try to explain herself. She didn't act confused or concerned when my mother started shouting. She didn't pretend like it was a misunderstanding. She just bolted. That tells me everything I need to know. If my mom had been looking the other way when I wandered off, if she had been distracted for just a few seconds longer, I would have disappeared forever. I try not to dwell on it too much, but sometimes I can't help it. What was waiting for me at the other end of that walk? A car? A second person? A fate worse than I can imagine? I will never know, and that terrifies me. Last year, my family and I were vacationing in Myrtle Beach, staying in a high-rise resort right on the water. The days were filled with the usual beach activities, lounging by the ocean, swimming, eating out at local restaurants. But the nights were quiet. That particular night, I found myself unable to sleep, staring up at the ceiling well past 3 a.m., tossing and turning with no sign of exhaustion setting in. Frustrated, I decided to step out onto the balcony for some air, hoping the fresh breeze would help clear my head. The second I stepped outside, I was struck by how beautiful everything looked. The full moon reflected off the dark ocean, casting an almost ethereal glow across the water. For the first time since we had arrived, the beach was completely empty, stretching endlessly in both directions without a single soul in sight. There was something surreal about it, something peaceful, and in my sleepless state, I found myself drawn to the idea of taking a walk along the shoreline. It seemed harmless enough. A quick stroll, maybe 10 or 15 minutes at most, just enough to relax me before heading back upstairs. Without much thought, I grabbed my headphones, slipped on a t-shirt, and quietly left the room without telling anyone where I was going. At the base of the resort, there was a large outdoor pool area with an empty bar and 2 separate boardwalks leading down to the beach, each about 100 feet apart. Tall swaths of grass lined the wooden pathways, separating the resort from the sand. The entire area was eerily still, with no guests lingering by the pool or sitting at the tables. As I stepped onto the right boardwalk and started toward the beach, I noticed movement up ahead. A man was walking toward me from the water. A strange sense of unease settled in my stomach. I had just been on the balcony, looking over this exact stretch of sand, and I knew for a fact that there had been no one there. Yet here he was, moving steadily in my direction, as if he had just emerged from the ocean itself. As he got closer, I could make out his features. A man in his late 30s with large square glasses, a backpack slung over his shoulder, and clothing that looked slightly tattered. There was something about the way he carried himself that set me on edge. He didn't have the relaxed, carefree demeanor of someone enjoying a nighttime stroll on the beach. Instead, he looked anxious, almost like he was waiting for someone or searching for something. As we passed each other, we made brief eye contact. I gave him a polite nod, trying to brush off the uneasiness, but he said nothing. Even after I had walked past him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Reaching the sand, I turned right and began walking along the shoreline, letting the cool breeze wash over me as I listened to music. The sound of the waves was calming, and for a moment, I felt at ease, reassured by the idea that maybe I had overreacted. The sensation didn't last long. Within a minute, a strange prickling feeling crept up my spine, an instinctive sense that something was wrong. I removed my headphones and turned around. A dark figure was following me. Though he was upshore, positioned between me and the resort, I recognized his build immediately. It was the same man I had passed on the boardwalk. A flicker of panic set in as my mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe he had simply decided to take a walk in the same direction. Maybe this was all just a coincidence. It felt ridiculous to assume I was in any real danger, yet the way he had positioned himself so that he was cutting off my access back to the resort didn't sit right with me. Trying to remain calm, I turned my gaze back toward the water and continued walking. A few seconds later, I glanced over my shoulder again. He was closer. No longer walking parallel to me, he was now moving toward me at an angle, shortening the distance between us with every step. My pulse quickened, and without consciously deciding to, I picked up my pace. Almost immediately, he matched my speed. Rationalization was no longer an option. This wasn't a coincidence. This was intentional. I stopped thinking. I turned abruptly in the opposite direction, and the second I did, I saw him pivot to match my movement. He wasn't just walking anymore. He was power walking, closing the distance between us quickly. The realization hit me all at once. I was being hunted. Adrenaline flooded my system as I broke into a run. He took off as well, matching my pace but staying upshore, positioning himself so that if I attempted to veer toward the boardwalk, he could intercept me. I had no plan, no sense of where I was going. I just knew I had to keep running. For what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was probably closer to 10 or 15 minutes, I sprinted along the shoreline, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fought to maintain speed. Every time I glanced back, he was still there, relentless, never slowing. The strangest part of it all was the silence. Other than the sound of the waves and my own breathing, there was nothing. No voices, no passing cars, no distant footsteps on the boardwalk. Just the overwhelming emptiness of the night. Then, up ahead, I spotted a faint blue light. Squinting, I realized there was a small group of people sitting on a blanket in the sand. Relief surged through me. If I could get to them, I might have a chance to explain what was happening, to get them to help me. Summoning every last bit of energy, I sprinted toward them. As I got closer, my heart sank. The group consisted of 4 guys, surrounded by several empty liquor bottles. 3 of them were completely unconscious, sprawled out on the blanket in a drunken stupor. The 4th sat upright, barely registering my approach, his eyes half closed as he muttered something incoherent to himself. He was too far gone to notice me, let alone help. And then I saw the man stop in the distance, watching. I could almost see the moment he realized the state of the group, the instant he understood that they were useless to me. His posture changed, and without hesitation, he sprinted toward me at full speed. There was no time to think. Instead of running away, I did something I don't think he expected. I ran straight at him before sharply cutting to the right, darting past him and sprinting toward the resort as fast as I could. The move caught him off balance, giving me just enough of a head start to widen the distance between us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept pushing forward. The sight of the resort lights was the only thing that mattered. I didn't look back until I reached the boardwalk. He was still there, maybe 400 or 500 feet away now, still standing, still watching. Wasting no time, I sprinted toward the elevator, jamming the button repeatedly until the doors slid open. The second they did, I threw myself inside, mashing the closed door button with shaking hands. When I reached my floor, I bolted down the hall, unlocking the door to our room and slamming it shut behind me. I locked it, then double-locked it, then slid to the floor, trying to catch my breath. Even after my breathing slowed, I found myself crawling across the floor, afraid that if I stood up, he might somehow see me through the balcony doors. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I was around 6 years old, my mom had this weekly routine where she'd take me and my little brother to Target every Wednesday at 11 a.m., right after an appointment she had. It wasn't just any Target either. This was one of those giant super Targets, the kind that had everything from groceries to home goods, and it was in a nice, safe neighborhood. The kind of place where moms shopped with their kids, old couples browsed for random things, and nothing bad ever really seemed to happen. I always loved those Target trips. My brother and I would usually get a small treat, and we'd run around the toy aisle while my mom shopped for whatever we needed that week. It was such a normal part of our lives that I never thought twice about it. Until that one day when I noticed him. The first time I saw the man, he didn't really stand out for any particular reason, at least not in a way I could understand at 6 years old. He looked rough, probably in his 50s, wearing a worn-out Carhartt jacket, jeans with holes and paint stains all over them. He had this weird, toothless grin, the kind that made my stomach feel strange. I was a kid, and kids stare, so I just stood there and stared at him, and he stared back. Then we turned down an aisle, and he was gone. The next week, I didn't see him at all, but the week after that, he was there again, this time just a few aisles away. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just a guy who did his shopping at the same time we did. But every week after that, he kept showing up. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him near the grocery section, other times by the checkout lanes. Then, one week, I saw him standing in the toy aisle. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I still didn't say anything to my mom, because what would I even say? Hey, I keep seeing this weird guy at Target? That didn't seem like enough of a reason to be concerned. But then one day, things changed. We were shopping like usual when my mom told my brother and me to grab something from the next aisle over. We didn't think twice about it, we just went. But as soon as we turned the corner and were out of her sight, he was there. He walked right up to us and said hi. My little brother grabbed my arm. We had been taught not to talk to strangers, so we didn't say anything. We just took a small step back, hoping he would go away. But he didn't. Instead, he took another step forward and said, "My name's Tom. Do you want to go look at the toys with me?" That's when my brother and I completely lost it. We both burst into tears and ran as fast as we could back to my mom, barely able to get the words out through our sobbing. I don't even remember what I said to her, just that I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. My mom didn't panic, at least not in a way that we could see. She just pulled us in close, whispered for us to stay by her side, and kept shopping. But I could feel that something had shifted in her. She was on edge now. About 10 minutes later, we were in the kids' clothing section. My brother and I were still sniffling, trying to calm down, when I saw him again. He was walking straight toward us. I grabbed my mom's arm and pointed at him. Her eyes flicked over to where he was, and she immediately started moving. She didn't run, didn't yell, She just calmly started walking with us toward the store's security guard, who was standing near the exit. She kept her voice low and steady as she told the guard that a man had been following us around, and had even approached her kids, trying to lure us away. She was still explaining when, like clockwork, Tom walked right up next to us. I swear my heart stopped. He didn't even try to hide what he was doing. He immediately started talking over my mom, loudly, his words slurring together. I couldn't understand anything he was saying, but I remember his voice. It was rough and angry, like he was mad we had said something. Then, out of nowhere, he looked down at me and my brother and said, "What you crying for?" I was already freaked out before, but when he said that, I completely lost it again. My brother and I clung to our mom as we sobbed. The security guard must have seen enough because he stepped in between us and Tom and told him, very firmly, that he needed to leave the store immediately. But Tom didn't leave right away. Instead, he took one step closer, locked eyes with my mom, and started unbuckling his belt. "Chew need this?" he said, grinning. "Chew need this?" I don't even know what he meant by that. I don't want to know what he meant by that. That's when the security guard grabbed him, yanked him backward, and dragged him out of the store. I don't remember much after that. My mom held on to us tight, shaking but trying not to let us see it, and we left the store as fast as we could. We never saw Tom again, but I never forgot him. Even now, I still hate going to that Target.